At 58, he had nothing left. No crew. No territory. No name that still carried weight. The man who once controlled entire districts of Seoul's underworld now slept in the back seat of a car that wasn't fully paid for. People used to lower their voices when he entered a room. Now, nobody looked twice. So when he used the last of his money to buy a dying restaurant on a quiet street, it didn't make sense. Not to anyone who knew who he used to be. Not even to him. But 3 days after he got the keys, he opened a locked door in the back of the kitchen. Inside was something that should not exist anymore. Something tied to a past he had buried with his own hands. And the moment he saw it, he understood one thing. This wasn't over. If you're ready for a story about power, dignity, forbidden love, and the sweetest revenge you've ever witnessed, then you're in the right place. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications because this channel brings you the most addictive romance stories you won't find anywhere else. Drop a fire in the comments if you're team revenge. And let's get into this story. His name was Kang Dae-hyun. But nobody called him that. Not for the last 30 years. In the streets, in quiet backrooms, in places where deals were made without paper or witnesses, he was known as the silent broker. Not because he spoke little, but because when he did, things moved. He wasn't loud. He wasn't reckless. He didn't need to be. Others built power through fear. Dae-hyun built it through understanding. He knew how money flowed, how loyalty shifted, how silence could be worth more than violence. That's why his organization didn't look like the others. No flashy displays. No unnecessary bloodshed. No chaos. Everything ran like a system. Precise. Measured. Controlled. Even the tattoo on his wrist reflected that philosophy. A small, black ink symbol, barely visible unless you looked closely. Not a threat. A signature. A reminder. Control over everything. Especially yourself. For decades, he stayed ahead. While others fought for territory, he built networks. While others chased attention, he erased his presence. He became something rare in his world. Untouchable. Until the day he wasn't. It didn't happen all at once. Nothing like that ever does. It started small. Accounts that didn't reconcile. Shipments delayed without explanation. Conversations that ended just a little too quickly when he walked in. He noticed. He always noticed. But he didn't act. Not yet. Because in his world, reacting too early was the same as losing control. And losing control meant everything collapsed. The first real crack came from someone he trusted. Not just trusted. Built. A man he had brought up from nothing. Min Jae. Sharp. Patient. Loyal, at least, that's what everyone believed. Including Dae-hyun. Especially Dae-hyun. The night everything changed, there was no violence. No warning. Just silence. Accounts emptied. Assets frozen. Safe houses compromised. By the time Dae-hyun understood what was happening, it was already finished. Min Jae didn't just betray him. He replaced him. And the most dangerous part? He didn't do it alone. Dae-hyun didn't fight back. That's what confused everyone. That's what made people whisper. Because men like him don't walk away. They retaliate. They destroy. They make examples. But Dae-hyun did none of that. He disappeared. Quietly. Completely. Because he saw something no one else did. Something worse than betrayal. A pattern. One that meant this wasn't just a takeover. It was something bigger. Something planned far beyond Min Jae. He didn't run because he was afraid. He ran because he understood. This wasn't finished with him. The shift didn't come with noise. No confrontation. No warning. No moment he could point to and say, "This is where it started." It had already started. Long before he noticed. Dae-hyun went back through everything. Not emotionally. Methodically. Accounts first. Movements. Transfers. Delays. At a glance, Everything looked intact. Balanced. Clean. But Dae-hyun didn't look at numbers the way most people did. He looked at behavior. And the behavior had changed. Money wasn't disappearing. It was being redirected. Quietly. Carefully. In ways that didn't trigger alarms. That meant whoever was doing this understood the system. Completely. He traced deeper. Operations. Routes. Partnerships. Some shipments were being rerouted through unfamiliar channels. Others delayed, just enough to disrupt timing without raising suspicion. It wasn't sabotage. It was control. That's when the realization settled in. This wasn't someone breaking his system. It was someone rebuilding it, from the inside. Min-jae's name appeared again. Not directly. Never in a way that could be proven. But always close. Always adjacent. Always present. Dae-hyun called him in once. Not to accuse. Just to observe. Min-jae walked in the same way he always did. Calm. Measured. Respectful. No hesitation. No shift in posture. Everything running smoothly? Dae-hyun asked. Min-jae nodded. Yes. No elaboration. No unnecessary words. That was normal. That was how he had trained him. And yet, something felt off. Not in what he said. In what he didn't. There was no tension. No pressure. No sign that anything was wrong. And that was wrong. Because by then, something was wrong. Dae-hyun dismissed him without another question. He didn't confront him. Because confrontation required certainty. And certainty required time. But time was no longer on his side. The next hit came quietly. One of his holding accounts froze. No warning. No explanation. Then another. Then a third. Within 48 hours, sections of his financial structure started locking down. Not collapsing. Freezing. Legal pressure followed. Investigations. Questions from places that had never looked in his direction before. That was new. Dae-hyun understood something immediately. This wasn't internal anymore. Someone had reached outside the system. And pulled something in. That changed everything. Because internal betrayal could be handled. External pressure meant exposure. And exposure meant something much larger was at play. He moved quickly then. Not publicly. Quietly. He checked his safe locations. Some were already compromised. Others untouched. Too clean. That told him something else. This wasn't chaos. This was selection. Someone knew exactly what to take. And what to leave behind. That required more than access. It required planning. Time. Patience. And positioning. Min-jae wasn't working alone. That truth settled in without resistance. Dae-hyun stood in the center of what used to be his strongest operation hub. Empty now. Silent. He looked around the space carefully. Every detail. Every absence. Nothing was broken. Nothing was forced. It had all been transferred. Like he had never been there at all. That was the moment it became clear. This wasn't a takeover. It was a replacement. He hadn't been attacked. He had been removed. Systematically. Precisely. Completely. Dae-hyun didn't try to reclaim it. That's what anyone else would have done. Fight. Push back. Reassert control. But Dae-hyun didn't react like anyone else. Because he saw something they didn't. A pattern beyond Min-jae. Beyond the accounts. Beyond the pressure. Something bigger. Something that didn't just want his power. But his absence. And when something that calculated decides you shouldn't exist anymore, you don't stand in its way. You step out of sight. That's what he did. No announcement. No resistance. No last move. He disappeared. Completely. No one saw him leave. No one tracked where he went. Within days, his name stopped coming up. Within weeks, it was replaced. Min Jae stepped into the position seamlessly, as if it had always been his. And the system kept running. Only now, without Kang Daehyun. And that was the final confirmation. This had been planned long before it happened. Daehyun didn't run to survive. He ran because he understood something no one else did. This wasn't over. Something worse was still coming. Disappearing wasn't difficult. For a man like Kang Daehyun, it was natural. He didn't leave a trail. He didn't contact anyone. He didn't look back. Weeks passed. Then months. The city continued without him. His name stopped circulating. His absence, accepted faster than it should have been. That told him something important. He hadn't just been removed. He had been replaced seamlessly. Daehyun moved through different parts of the city without purpose. At least, that's how it looked. But he was still observing. Still studying patterns. Still paying attention to what others ignored. That part of him hadn't changed. What had changed was his position. For the first time in decades, he wasn't inside the system. He was outside it. And from the outside, everything looked different. He noticed how operations moved now. More rigid. Less adaptive. More controlled. But not by intelligence. By force. That confirmed what he already suspected. Min Jae wasn't running the system the same way. Which meant whoever stood above him was shaping it differently. That thought stayed with him. Quiet. Unresolved. Until the day he saw the building. It wasn't remarkable. That was the first thing that made him stop. A restaurant. Old. Fading. The kind of place people passed without noticing. Windows clouded with dust. Sign barely holding onto its frame. A door that hadn't been opened in years. It should have meant nothing. But Daehyun didn't believe in nothing. He stood across the street longer than necessary. Watching. Not the building. The space around it. No activity. No movement. No signs of recent use. And yet, something felt wrong. Not abandoned. Paused. That was the difference. Abandoned places decay unevenly. They collapse into disorder. This place hadn't. It was still. Too still. Like it had been left exactly the way it was. On purpose. Daehyun crossed the street slowly. Each step measured. Each glance controlled. He stood in front of the door. Close enough now to see details others would miss. The lock wasn't new. But it wasn't completely worn either. Maintained. That didn't match the rest of the building. He reached out. Paused for a brief moment. Then pushed. It opened. Inside, the air was stale. Heavy. Untouched. But not ruined. Tables were still aligned. Chairs stacked neatly. Kitchen equipment intact. This wasn't decay. It was preservation. Daehyun walked further in. Slowly. Quietly. His eyes moved across everything. Mapping it. Understanding it. Every detail felt intentional. Nothing had been taken. Nothing disturbed. Which meant one thing. Whoever left this place intended for it to stay exactly like this. Waiting. The thought settled in his mind without resistance. Waiting for who? He didn't answer that. Not yet. Instead, he moved toward the back. The kitchen. Where most people would stop looking. Because kitchens are predictable. Functional. Unimportant once they stop working. But Daehyun didn't believe in unimportant spaces. Especially not ones that felt this controlled. That's when he saw the door. It wasn't hidden. But it wasn't obvious either. Set slightly off alignment with the wall. Just enough to be overlooked. Locked. Of course it was. Daehyun stood in front of it. Still. Silent. His reflection faintly visible in the worn surface. This moment felt familiar. Not the place. Not the situation. The feeling. Standing at the edge of something unseen. Something layered beneath the surface. The same feeling he had before everything collapsed. But this time, he wasn't inside it. He was looking at it from the outside. That changed everything. He didn't hesitate. One precise movement, and the lock gave way. The door opened slowly. Darkness first. Then shape. Then detail. A small room. No windows. No natural light. Dust in the air. But not enough. Which meant it had been sealed properly. Recently enough. Dae-hyun stepped inside. And then he saw it. A metal cabinet. Closed. Untouched. Waiting. He approached it without rushing. Every step controlled. Every breath steady. His hand rested on the handle. Cold. Solid. Real. He opened it. Inside. Paper. Not scattered. Not damaged. Organized. Preserved. A ledger. Thick. Precise. Familiar. Too familiar. Dae-hyun picked it up slowly. Carefully. His eyes moved across the first page. Names. Dates. Transactions. Codes. Not just any codes. His codes. The ones only he understood. The ones that had never been written down anywhere else. And yet, here they were. Recorded. Stored. Protected. His grip tightened slightly. This wasn't coincidence. This wasn't forgotten. This was deliberate. Someone had taken the most important parts of his system and hidden them here. Not destroyed. Saved. For a reason. Dae-hyun turned another page. Then another. And then he saw the name. Min-jae. But not alone. There were others. Names he didn't recognize. Positions that didn't exist before. Connections that extended beyond anything he had built. His expression didn't change. But inside, something shifted. Because in that moment, the truth became unavoidable. This wasn't just a record of what had happened. It was the blueprint of something bigger. Something he had never seen coming. And somehow, it had been waiting here the entire time. For someone who could understand it. For someone like him. Dae-hyun closed the ledger slowly. The silence in the room felt different now. Heavier. Not empty anymore. Full. Because now, he knew. This place wasn't abandoned. It was left behind on purpose. And whatever had taken everything from him had made one mistake. They left the truth in a place only he could find. Dae-hyun didn't rush. He never did. The ledger sat open in front of him, resting against the cold metal edge of the cabinet. Dust floated in the air, barely disturbed, as if even time itself had slowed inside that room. He turned the next page. Carefully. Every entry was precise. Every line intentional. This wasn't a collection of records. It was a system. His system. But altered. Expanded in ways he had never authorized. Connections layered over connections. Money routes branching into sectors that didn't belong to his world. Corporate structures. Political channels. Offshore movements that reached far beyond anything he had built. Dae-hyun's eyes narrowed slightly. This wasn't evolution. It was integration. His network hadn't just been taken. It had been absorbed. He flipped back to earlier pages. Comparing. Tracing patterns. That's when he saw it. The shift point. A specific set of transactions. Subtle. Almost invisible unless you understood what you were looking at. That's where control changed. Not when Min-jae stepped in. Not when the accounts froze. Before that. Much earlier. Dae-hyun leaned back slightly, the realization settling in without resistance. Min-jae hadn't started this. He had joined it. The betrayal wasn't the beginning. It was the transition. Dae-hyun turned another page. Names appeared again. More clearly now. Not street-level operators. Not internal figures. External. Executives. Advisors. entities that existed in spaces his world wasn't supposed to touch. And yet, they were here. Connected. Coordinating. His system had been used as a foundation. A structure stable enough to build something larger on top of. Something cleaner. More controlled. More hidden. That's when the final piece fell into place. Daehyun wasn't removed because he was weak. He was removed because he was unnecessary. The system could now function without him. Better, from their perspective. Because unlike him, they didn't value balance. They valued control at scale. And Daehyun? He had always kept things contained. Predictable. That was his strength. And his limitation. He closed his eyes for a brief moment. Not in frustration. Not in anger. In recognition. For 30 years, he thought he was building something untouchable. But in reality, he had been building something usable. A foundation. For people he had never even seen. His eyes opened again. Calm. Focused. Because now, for the first time, he understood the full structure. And more importantly, its weaknesses. He flipped to the final section of the ledger. The most recent entries. That's where Min-jae appeared again. But this time, his position was different. Elevated. Not as a leader. As an intermediary. A bridge between two systems. And suddenly, everything about him made sense. His silence. His patience. His precision. He hadn't betrayed Daehyun for power. He had been placed. Positioned carefully over time. Trained. Refined. Trusted. Until the moment came. To replace him. Daehyun's grip on the ledger tightened slightly. Not out of anger. Out of clarity. Because now he could see the entire design. The long game. And the one thing they hadn't accounted for. Him. They had studied his patterns. Predicted his decisions. Removed him cleanly. But they made one assumption. That once he was out, he would stay out. That he would disappear permanently. Become irrelevant. And that assumption was their only mistake. Daehyun closed the ledger slowly. The sound echoed softly in the small room. For the first time since everything collapsed. He had something real. Not suspicion. Not instinct. Proof. Enough to dismantle everything they had built. But that wasn't what interested him most. What mattered was control. And now, he had it again. Not through position. Not through force. Through knowledge. He stepped out of the room, the ledger still in his hand. The restaurant felt different now. Not abandoned. Occupied. By something invisible. Something waiting. But not for him anymore. Because now, he understood its purpose. This wasn't just a hiding place. It was a failsafe. A record of truth. Left behind in case something went wrong. And something had. Daehyun walked toward the front of the restaurant slowly, his mind already moving ahead. Calculating. Planning. Not revenge. Something more precise. Something final. Because this wasn't about taking back what he lost. That system was already gone. This was about ending what replaced it. And for the first time, he had exactly what he needed. They thought he was erased. But now, he had the truth they could never control. Daehyun didn't move immediately. He never did. Power wasn't in reaction. It was in timing. Days passed. Then weeks. From the outside, nothing changed. The restaurant stayed quiet. Lights off most nights. No signs of activity. But underneath, something was shifting. Daehyun began rebuilding. Not visibly. Not structurally. Quietly. He didn't recreate his old network. That would have been predictable. Trackable. Instead, he did something different. He reconnected with fragments. Not the powerful. Not the obvious. The overlooked. People who had once moved small pieces of his system. People who understood function. But were never seen as important. delivery coordinators, account intermediaries, logistics handlers. The kind of people no one watches. That was the difference. Because while the new system controlled the top, it ignored the base. And Daehyun understood something they didn't. Every system, no matter how powerful, depends on what it overlooks. He didn't give orders. He didn't reveal himself. He only made adjustments. Small ones. A delayed transfer. A misrouted shipment. A broken sequence in timing. Nothing major. Nothing obvious. But enough to create friction. And friction creates attention. That's when Min-jae noticed. Not immediately, but gradually. A pattern forming where there shouldn't be one. Something interfering with the system. Something precise. Controlled. Familiar. Min-jae sat in silence, reviewing reports that didn't make sense. Numbers that were correct, but not behaving correctly. That's when it hit him. This wasn't disruption. This was design. And there was only one person who designed systems like this. Daehyun. The realization didn't come with panic. It came with tension. Because if Daehyun was active again, then something had gone wrong. Something they hadn't accounted for. The meeting was arranged without words. No messages. No direct contact. Just alignment. Time. Place. Understanding. An old structure, long unused. A place where no one would look anymore. Min-jae arrived first. He stood in the center of the empty space, still as ever. But this time, there was something different. Not fear. Awareness. Daehyun stepped in moments later. Silent. Measured. Nothing about him had changed. That was the unsettling part. You should have stayed gone, Min-jae said. His voice was calm. Controlled. But underneath, there was weight. Daehyun didn't respond immediately. He studied him instead. Not as an enemy. As a result. Then, without a word, he placed the ledger on the table between them. The sound was soft, but final. Min-jae's eyes dropped to it. And for the first time, his composure shifted. Just slightly. Enough. Because he understood what it meant. Not just records. Exposure. Everything they had built. Everything they had hidden. Reduced to something tangible. Something undeniable. Min-jae looked back up slowly. You don't understand what this is, he said. Daehyun's expression didn't change. But his voice, when he finally spoke, was quieter than expected. I do. A pause. Then, you were never in control. The words didn't sound like an accusation. They sounded like a conclusion. Min-jae's jaw tightened slightly. Not in anger. In recognition. Because deep down, he already knew. That was the truth neither of them could ignore. Min-jae had taken power. But he hadn't owned it. And now, that power was about to disappear. This isn't revenge, Min-jae said, almost as if trying to define the moment. Daehyun shook his head slightly. No. Another pause. Then, it's correction. The word landed heavier than anything else. Because it wasn't emotional. It was precise. Final. Daehyun picked up the ledger again. Not as leverage. As conclusion. Because the outcome was already decided. Min-jae knew it. There was no negotiation. No alternative. Because once truth exists in the open, systems like theirs don't survive it. Daehyun turned away first. Not waiting for a response. Not needing one. Because this moment was never about confrontation. It was about inevitability. And as he walked away, he understood something clearly. He hadn't come back to take anything. He came back to end it. The collapse didn't happen all at once. It never does. There was no announcement. No visible explosion. No moment the world stopped and noticed. Instead, things began to shift. Quietly. Accounts that had once moved without friction stopped. Transactions froze mid-process. Approvals that were once automatic were suddenly questioned. Investigations began. Not publicly. Not immediately. But internally. The kind that spreads without warning. Names started surfacing. Not all at once. One at a time. Connections that were once invisible became patterns. Patterns that couldn't be ignored anymore. And once attention found them, it didn't leave. Min Jae disappeared within days. No statement. No trace. Just absence. The same way Daehyun had once vanished. Only this time, there was no return waiting. The ones above him? They didn't disappear. They couldn't. Because unlike Min Jae, they existed in places that required visibility. Positions that couldn't be abandoned without consequence. That was their weakness. And now, it was exposed. The system they built began to collapse under its own weight. Not because it was weak, but because it was seen. And systems like that only survive in the dark. Daehyun didn't watch it happen. He didn't follow the reports. Didn't track the outcomes. He already knew how it would end. Because once control is broken at the foundation, everything above it falls naturally. Months passed. The restaurant changed. Slowly at first. Then completely. The dust disappeared. The windows cleared. The space came back to life. Not as it once was, but as something new. Simpler. Quieter. Intentional. Daehyun stood behind the counter one morning, adjusting a small detail no one else would notice. A plate slightly off-center. A line not perfectly aligned. He fixed it without thinking. Some habits never leave. But everything else had. No guards. No network. No hidden structure behind the surface. Just space. Stillness. Control. A different kind of power. One that didn't depend on anyone else. One that couldn't be taken. A customer walked in. Paused. Looked around. New owner? They asked casually. Daehyun looked up briefly. Then nodded once. Nothing more. The question didn't matter. The answer didn't either. Because what he had now wasn't something anyone could understand from the outside. And for the first time in decades, that was exactly how he wanted it. He had built something once. Lost it. Understood it. And in the end, walked away from it completely. Not because he had to, but because he chose to. The city moved on. As it always does. Unaware of what had happened beneath it. Unaware of what had nearly taken control of everything. And unaware of the one man who had ended it. Quietly. Completely. Without ever needing to be seen again. Because real power was never about being known. It was about knowing when to disappear. If everything you built, your power, your identity, your entire life, was taken from you, and one day, you found the truth behind it, what would you do? Would you fight to take it all back? Rebuild what was lost? Reclaim your place at the top? Or would you do what Kang Daehyun did? And become something they could never control again? Because here's the part most people don't realize. Revenge keeps you tied to the past. Power keeps you tied to the system. But walking away, with full understanding, that's something else entirely. That's freedom. So think about it carefully. If you had the chance, would you choose control? Or would you choose peace? Drop your answer below. Because in stories like this, the ending isn't what matters most. It's the choice that defines who you become after everything is gone.